Hey guys, enjoy these new 20 stories. We hope you enjoy them. Let us know your thoughts. And as always, most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please smash that subscribe button and hit that like button too. It's free and does so much for us. We're forever grateful. Now to the stories.
I wasn't even planning to go out that night. I'd already bailed on two people that week because work had been dragging me through hell and back. I was running on caffeine and spite. But something about Emily's messages made me want to give it one last shot before deleting Tinder again. She had this dry sense of humor that wasn't forced, and we'd been laughing over messages about how awful early 2000s pop was. Her pictures were normal, no filters, no weird group shots. No, here's me skydiving with a stranger in Thailand stuff. Just a couple of pics of her smiling on what looked like a balcony, one with a dog, and one where she was wearing this oversized hoodie that said, "I'm cold, duh." She just seemed normal. Said she was a paralegal, lived by herself, didn't want anything too serious, but wasn't into hookups either. We had this 20-minute back and forth about which movie sequel should never happened, and I remember thinking, "Than, maybe this one won't suck." We planned to meet at her place, grab takeout nearby, and hang out. Chill vibes. She gave me her address, which was in this average-looking part of the city. Row homes, narrow streets, lots of cars double parked like nobody cared. I parked a block away and walked over with my hands full of food, trying not to trip on the busted sidewalk. Her place looked like every other house on the block, red brick, tiny steps, one of those flimsy screen doors. When I knocked, I heard noise right away. Not music or a TV. It sounded like kids. Emily opened the door looking flustered. She smiled quickly, then glanced behind her like she was trying to hide something. She looked the same as her photos, just more tired. Her hair was tied up, sweatshirt hanging off one shoulder, socks on, but no shoes. "Hey," she said, and sort of laughed like she wasn't sure if I was gonna run or not. That's when a toddler came sprinting into the hallway behind her, holding a plastic dinosaur in one hand and a juice box in the other. He stopped when he saw me and just stared. I blinked. She looked at the kid, then back at me. "Okay, so I didn't exactly tell you everything," she said. "No kidding." Before I could even respond, another kid, maybe a year older, came around the corner holding a tablet, yelling about something being frozen. And then another one started crying in a room nearby. 3 kids, all under the age of 5, maybe. I stood there like an idiot with 2 bags of Thai food while she tried to talk over the chaos. She told me they were hers, all 3. She never mentioned she had kids, let alone a whole preschool class. Said it was complicated, that she was in the middle of separating from her husband. That they still lived in the same house, but mostly ignored each other now. Then, like a scene from a movie, this dude walks out of the hallway. Bearded, tall, looked like he hadn't slept in a week, holding a laundry basket. He stopped when he saw me and gave me a nod like we were 2 coworkers stuck on the same shift. That was her husband. I honestly didn't know what to say. My brain was buffering hard. She just waved me in like this was all super casual. I stepped inside because I didn't want to be rude, also because I had no idea what else to do. The house smelled like baby wipes and leftover chicken nuggets. There were toys everywhere. On the couch, under the table, inside the shoes by the door. One of the kids sat down right at my feet and started eating a dry waffle. Emily started unpacking the food like nothing was wrong. Meanwhile, the guy walked into the kitchen, muttered something, and disappeared upstairs. I sat down on the edge of the couch and looked at her like, "Are you serious right now?" She told me she hadn't planned for it to happen like this. That she usually meets people outside the house, but it had been a rough week, and the kids were sick, and she didn't have anyone to watch them. Then she said she didn't want to scare me off by being too upfront. I didn't know what to say. I mean, yeah, I could have just left. But I didn't. Part of me was trying to figure out if this was some kind of weird test, and another part of me just felt bad for her. The kids were loud but not annoying. She looked completely worn down, and I kept thinking, what if this was her trying to have one normal night? So I stayed, for a little while. We ate food on the couch while 2 of the kids climbed all over her, and the third fell asleep on a beanbag. She looked at me and said, "This is my life now." It didn't feel like a date. It felt like I got dropped into the middle of someone else's chaos. Her phone kept buzzing with messages from her husband upstairs. She showed me one where he said, "You bringing random dudes into the house now." Real classy. I asked her why she even bothered with Tinder. She shrugged and said, because I'm still here. Still a person. Not just a mom or a soon-to-be ex. I need something that's just mine, even if it's messy. After about an hour, I told her I should head out. She nodded like she expected it. Walked me to the door, thanked me for being cool about it. I didn't really know what to say. I think I just told her to hang in there. When I got in the car, I just sat there for a minute, trying to process what the hell just happened. It wasn't the worst date I'd ever been on, but it was the most real, and definitely not what I signed up for. She texted me a few days later and said she understood if I didn't want to talk again. I never replied. Not because I was mad, just because I didn't have the energy to untangle that kind of situation. And maybe because, deep down, I didn't want to be someone's temporary escape. If I'm being totally honest, I probably ignored more red flags than I should with Josh. Like, I think I wanted a story more than I wanted a person. Which sounds dumb, but I had this streak of bad, boring dates. I was kind of in this place where I needed something to break the pattern. Josh wasn't boring, that's for sure. He messaged first. The bio was short but confident. One of those I'm bad at bios, just ask me stuff types, which is annoying to find. His pictures weren't filtered, no gym selfies, just regular shots of him hiking or standing next to a car I'm 99% sure wasn't his. He had this crooked smile that made him look like he was always about to say something sarcastic. Something about it hooked me. I figured, whatever, let's just meet and see what happens. We picked this weird little diner on the edge of town, one of those places that always smells like bacon grease and dish soap. I got there first and grabbed a booth by the window, the kind with the torn vinyl seats and a jukebox that probably hadn't worked since the 90s. He walked in about 5 minutes later, tall, kind of lanky, wearing a black hoodie and jeans that looked like they'd been through some stuff. He smiled when he saw me, and for the first 5 minutes it was normal, like actually good. He talked fast, like he was always running out of time. Told me about how he used to work construction but hated taking orders, so now he flips cars and does random gigs. Said he didn't believe in 9-to-5 life, which I kind of respected. I told him about my job, my cat, how I just moved into a new place with zero furniture except a food and a dying plant. He laughed at that. It felt easy, weirdly. But then something shifted about 20 minutes in. The waitress came by to refill his coffee, and after she left, he said something about how she looked like his ex but with less attitude. I laughed a little, thinking he was joking, but then he started talking more about this ex. Said she was one of those girls who thinks she's always right, and how she used to go through his phone, get jealous, blow up over nothing. At first I nodded along like, yeah, relationships can get messy. But then he said, real casually, that she got him arrested once for pushing her too hard during an argument. He leaned back and sipped his coffee like he just told me what his favorite movie was. I just froze for a second. I didn't even know what to say. He saw my face and said, relax, it wasn't like that. She was being dramatic. The cops have to take someone if they get called. You know how it is. And that's the moment where everything flipped in my head. Like the crooked smile, the fast talking, the mysterious vibe. It all stopped being charming and started feeling like a setup. But here's the thing, I didn't leave. Not right away. I knew I should have, but I didn't want to cause a scene. And some twisted part of me wanted to hear the rest. So I stayed. He went on about how he had to do anger management, how the whole thing was blown out of proportion, and how now he's careful about who he lets into his life. Said he's got trust issues, like it was a badge of honor. He said people just don't understand what it's like to be pushed past your limit. That sometimes you snap, and it doesn't make you a bad person, it makes you human. The way he said it, it was like he expected me to agree. Like he thought I'd lean in and say, yeah, I get it. I didn't. I just nodded slowly, and the whole time I was calculating how I was gonna leave without making it weird or dangerous. My brain was screaming to get out of there, but I kept thinking, if I react wrong, what if he flips? I didn't know him. I didn't know what push too hard meant to him. And the way he kept glancing around the diner like he was watching for someone made me feel like I was in a movie I didn't want to be in. When the check came, I grabbed it before he could. He smirked and said, nice, independent woman, I like that. I laughed, but it was hollow. My hands were shaking just a little. We walked out into the parking lot, and he offered to walk me to my car. I said no thanks, told him I was parked just around the corner and wanted to get a quick walk in. He didn't argue. Just nodded, said he'd hit me up later, and turned to leave. I waited until he drove off before I walked the other way. Called my best friend and told her everything, half laughing, half shaking. She was ready to drive over and drag me into a car herself. That night I blocked him, deleted the app, sat on my foot with my dying plan, and tried to shake off the feeling like I had brushed up against something dangerous. The next day, he messaged me on Instagram. I didn't even know he found my account. He said something like, "Had a good time last night. Most girls can't handle honesty, but you seem different." I blocked him there too. He never messaged again, thank God. But sometimes I think about how easily that could have gone another way. How close I was to just pretending it was fine, agreeing with him. Maybe even seeing him again out of politeness or boredom. And how some people probably do. That's the part that sticks with me the most. I should have known something was off the second I walked into his apartment and saw the living room had no couch. Like, not even a fold-out futon. Just a rug, a single bean bag, and a ring light. But I was already inside, shoes off, holding a bottle of wine like I was at some casual Netflix and chill setup. So I just smiled and tried not to let it weird me out. Tyler had that type of lip that makes you forget to ask basic questions. Tall, shaved head, clean beard, good teeth, wore rings without looking like he was trying. His profile had that effortlessly put together vibe. One of his pics was him standing on a rooftop with the city in the background, wind in his jacket like he was in an indie film. His bio said something like media junkie, always filming. Let's make something cool, which now feels painfully obvious, but back then it just read like every guy who thinks being a creator means he has a personality. We met on the app during a random Thursday night scroll. Matched in 5 minutes. He messaged with "What's your most irrational fear?" which was actually kind of a fun opener. And somehow that turned into us trading voice notes and joking about raccoons and conspiracy theories. He invited me over the next night, said he had some wine, good music, and a projector set up. I figured worst case I'd leave early. Best case, maybe he'd be a rare non-disaster. So I went, got there around 8. It was one of those newer apartment buildings with the fake wood floors and sterile white walls. Super clean, smelled like a Glade plug-in. He buzzed me up and met me at the door shirtless, which was already weird. Like, not in a sexy way. More like he just didn't bother to put one on. He grinned and said he'd just finished filming something and was cooling off. I stepped inside and instantly clocked 2 cameras on tripods. One pointed at the front door, one toward the corner where that beanbag sat. My brain flickered, but I told myself maybe he just forgot to put them away. Maybe he actually filmed stuff. Maybe this is what creative people do. He gave me a quick tour, bedroom, bathroom, kitchen. Every room had some kind of camera setup in it. Some on shelves, some in corners, one on a bookshelf facing the bed. I asked if he made short films or something, and he laughed and said, "Kind of." No explanation. No details. At that point, I should have left. But again, I was already there. Already committed to this idea that maybe he was just eccentric. So I poured a glass of wine and sat on the rug. He put on some music and sat across from me, cross-legged like we were about to meditate. That's when he said it. Casual as anything. So I should probably tell you, I live stream most of my dates. I thought he was joking, laughed, said, like to who. He took a sip of his wine and said, "Private group. People who support my work. It's kind of like an art project / commentary / digital intimacy thing." I didn't laugh that time. I just stared at him, trying to process what he meant. He kept talking like it was no big deal. Said he doesn't use real names, doesn't film anything without consent, though apparently implied presence counts in his book. Told me the camera wasn't on right now unless I was cool with it, in which case he could go hit record. I asked him why. Why anyone would think that was okay. And he gave this whole speech about transparency, of how people act differently when they know they're being watched, and how he finds it fascinating to see how far people go to perform being themselves. He said it's not sexual, it's psychological, which somehow made it creepier. I asked if anyone else knew. He said some do, some don't. That was it. I didn't freak out, even though I wanted to. I just stood up and said I needed to use the bathroom. Locked the door behind me and sat on the toilet lid, trying to decide if I should sneak out or confront him or what. There was a camera on the counter facing the mirror. No red light, no cord. But still, I came back out, grabbed my bag, and told him I had to leave. He didn't argue. Just said, "Cool, no worries. You were great on camera, by the way." I stopped at the door and asked, dead serious, were you recording that entire time? He smiled like he thought I was joking. Didn't answer, just shrugged and said, does it matter? I walked out without another word. Heart racing, face burning, brain running every possible scenario of how badly that could have gone. When I got home, I blocked him on everything, reported his profile. I even messaged the app support and said he might be secretly filming people. Never heard back. A week later, a burner account messaged me on Instagram. No profile picture, no posts. Just a DM that said, you read really well on screen. Natural energy. I blocked that too. I don't know if he actually posted the footage anywhere. I hope not. I never saw anything online, never found his channel or whatever, but I think about it a lot. How he didn't even try to hide it. How it was all just part of his process. Since then, I don't go to anyone's apartment on the first date. I ask more questions. I don't just assume someone's weirdness is harmless, because that's the thing. Sometimes it's not. I met Megan on a Tuesday, which I remember because I was eating leftover pizza in bed and watching some awful true crime doc, swiping half out of boredom and half out of that sad curiosity that hits at night. Her profile popped up, and it was one of those that makes you stop for a second. She had this wild energy in her photos, like hair always halfway in her face, that crooked smile, eyes that looked like she was always about to pull you into something weird and fun. Her bio said something like bad at texting, worse at small talk. Let's get food and roast people. I laughed, swiped right, and we matched instantly. We'd messaged for a day or two. It was mostly just dumb banter, which I liked. No deep, what are you looking for convos, just jokes and memes and a mutual agreement that pineapple on pizza is criminal. She suggested grabbing drinks that Friday and said she had a cool dive bar in mind. I said sure, and that was that. The bar she picked was this basement level spot I'd never even noticed before. No sign, just a red door and a bouncer who looked like he was half asleep. I walked in and immediately liked the place. Dim lights, graffiti on the walls, cheap drinks, and that weird old jukebox in the corner playing stuff no one under 30 recognizes. Megan was already there, sitting in a booth with her back to the wall, sipping a gin and tonic and wearing this oversized denim jacket with patches all over it. She looked up and grinned when she saw me, waved me over like we'd known each other forever. So far, so good. But here's where it started to tilt. When I got to the booth, she wasn't alone. Another girl was sitting next to her. At first, I thought maybe it was a friend she ran into or something, but Megan just said, oh, this is Lex. Hope that's cool. She's hilarious, and I figured the more the merrier. I was caught off guard, but I didn't want to be rude, so I just smiled and shook Lex's hand. She was loud and immediately started cracking jokes like she had 5 drinks already. Megan looked completely unfazed. Said they'd just been chatting about Tinder disasters and how every guy in the city either owns a dog or plays guitar badly. We ordered drinks, and I figured maybe it wasn't a big deal. Like maybe Megan was nervous or just one of those people who brings friends everywhere. So I tried to relax and just go with it. The conversation was fast and funny at first. We were roasting each other's playlists and debating which chips are objectively the best. But about 20 minutes in, something started to feel off. Lex kept taking pictures. At first it was subtle, like quick snaps under the table, but then she'd full on hold up her phone, pretend to take selfies, and I realized I was in almost all of them. I asked what was up, and Megan just laughed and said, oh, don't worry, she documents everything. It's her thing. I wasn't sure what that meant, but okay. Then Lex pulled out this tiny recorder and placed it in the middle of the table like it was normal. I looked at it, looked at Megan, and she just shrugged and said, we do this thing sometimes, like a podcast. Chill, you're not being roasted or anything. That's when the red flag started slapping me in the face. I asked what the podcast was about, and Lex lit up and said, oh, it's a thing we're working on. Just a rough cut. We meet up with guys from Tinder and kind of see what they say when they think they're just being casual. It's like social commentary, but funny. I thought they were joking. I laughed. But they weren't laughing. Megan sipped her drink and said, you're actually doing really well, though. Most guys already told us something awful by now. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to just get up and leave. Another part of me was trying to keep it together, not lose it in the middle of some bar over something that might not even be real. I asked if they'd told the guys they were recording. Lex just said, sometimes, depends on the vibe. Megan looked at me and said, Don't take it personal. You seemed interesting. We thought maybe you'd actually give us something worth using. That hit weird. Like it was just a character in their dumb little side project. A punchline and a joke I didn't know I was part of. I asked them to delete the pictures and turn off the recorder. Lex rolled her eyes and said, "Relax, we blur faces and change names." I stood up. I don't know if they expected that, but Megan stopped smiling. She looked to know I had ruined the night. She didn't even try to explain or say sorry, just said, "Wow, okay. Guess you're not as cool as we thought." I walked out. Didn't even finish my drink. The bouncer gave me a weird look on the way out, like he knew exactly what had gone down. I got in my car, sat there for a bit, and then blocked both of them before I even started the engine. A few days later, I got a message on a different app. Random account, no profile picture. Just said, "You actually came off decent. Don't worry, we won't use your audio." I didn't reply. I still think about that night sometimes. How easy it is to get pulled into something you didn't sign up for. How people will treat your time, your presence, like content. Like you're just a piece of some messed up story they're trying to tell to make themselves seem clever. I didn't delete Tinder after that, but I definitely stopped going on random bar meetups. And every time I see someone holding their phone a little too long on a date, I wonder how many people are getting recorded without ever knowing it. I matched with Ashley while waiting in line at the DMV. I was stuck behind this dude arguing about a parking ticket like his life depended on it. So I pulled out my phone to kill time. Swiped through a couple of profiles and then hers popped up. Blonde, denim jacket, a dog in the background of almost every picture. Her bio said coffee snob, recovering people pleaser, fluent in sarcasm. It wasn't groundbreaking, but it felt real. She looked like someone who'd laugh at my bad jokes and call me out on my crap in the same breath. I swiped right. We matched within minutes. We messaged on and off for a few days. Nothing too deep. Some memes, a conversation about how oat milk is just adult make-believe, and a back and forth about which fast food fries are superior. She said Five Guys, I said Wendy's. We agreed to disagree. Eventually, she asked if I wanted to grab tacos and hang out. She lived a few neighborhoods over, said there was a spot by her place that did killer margaritas. I was into it. I said yes. The day of the date, she texted me and said her place was a little chaotic because she had some family stuff going on, so could we just chill at her sister's apartment instead? She said it was empty for the weekend, we could order food, watch something dumb, keep it low-key. I didn't really think twice. I just figured she was being resourceful. Honestly, I was just looking forward to hanging out in sweatpants with someone that wasn't my cat. She sent the address, and it was in this nicer part of town, all townhouses and quiet streets, and people who definitely own pollutants. I showed up around 7, bag of takeout in one hand, sheep wine in the other. She opened the door looking exactly like her photos, messy bun, oversized hoodie, no makeup, but still somehow put together. She smiled, told me to come in, said she'd been dying for a burrito all day. The place was clean but lived in. A few framed pictures on the walls, some candles that smelled like vanilla or cookies or something cozy. We set up the food on the coffee table, turned on some terrible reality show, and sat cross-legged on the floor. It was easy, comfortable. She laughed at the same dumb scenes I did, made fun of the people on screen, wiped salsa off my face without making it weird. At one point she asked if I could grab a blanket from the closet near the bedroom. I got up, found the closet, opened it, and immediately froze. There were clothes in there, a lot of them. Men's clothes. Folded jeans, button-downs, shoes lined up neatly at the bottom. The kind of stuff you don't keep in a guest closet. I stood there for a second, staring, then slowly closed the door and walked back. She must have seen something shift in my face because she paused the TV and asked if I was good. I sat down and said, "Hey, weird question. Are we actually at your sister's place?" She blinked, didn't answer right away. Then she sighed and leaned back like she'd just gotten caught cheating on a test. Said, "Okay, I didn't want to freak you out." Never a good start. Turns out we weren't at her sister's place. We weren't even at a friend's place. We were at her ex's apartment. Not her ex from years ago, her ex who she'd broken up with a few weeks earlier. Her ex who still technically lived there. He was out of town for work, and she still had a key. Said she didn't have anywhere else to go because her actual apartment was full of roommates and she needed a quiet vibe for the night. So she let herself into his place like it was no big deal. She looked at me like this was completely logical, like borrowing your ex's apartment for a date was something everyone did now. I just sat there trying to wrap my head around the fact that I was mid-bite into a taco inside another man's home, a man who had no clue I was there. I asked her if he'd be back soon. She said he wasn't due back until Sunday, and even if he came home early, he probably wouldn't care. We're chill like that, she said. Then she laughed and added, besides, if he shows up, we'll just hide in the bathroom. I didn't laugh. I was trying to figure out how to leave without making it weird, but also without triggering whatever part of her brain thought this was all normal. She was too calm, too matter of fact, like this wasn't her first time pulling something like this. I asked her straight up why she did. Why not just say it from the jump? She said, honestly, I just wanted one night where I could pretend everything was fine, like I had my own space, like things were normal. I didn't know what to say. I think part of me felt bad for her. The other part just wanted to leave before her ex came home early and found me sitting on his rug drinking wine from his cup. I told her I had to head out. She didn't argue, just nodded and said, yeah, okay. Thanks for not freaking out. On the way out, I passed a photo on the wall. It was of her and him taken on a beach. She hadn't taken it down. It was still framed, still sitting there like none of this was weird. I got to my car and just sat there for a few minutes, staring at the steering wheel like it was gonna give me answers. Then I drove home, deleted the app, and didn't talk to her again. A week later, I saw her on a different app. New name, new photos, but same smile. Bio said, looking for something real this time. And honestly, I hope she finds it. Somewhere that isn't someone else's apartment. I like to think I'm a pretty chill person when it comes to dates. Like, I'm not the type to get super picky about every little thing. I'm not gonna freak out if someone shows up wearing sneakers instead of dress shoes, or if they don't know who the Beatles are. I think a good vibe and solid conversation are enough to make a date fun. But with Brandon, I should have trusted my gut. We met on the app on a lazy Sunday afternoon. His profile picture was him on a hiking trail with the sun setting behind him, and his bio said, love adventure, hate small talk. Let's get coffee and see where the day takes us. I liked that he didn't have some cliche bio. It was simple, and there was something about it that made me think he might be a bit different from the usual crowd. Our conversation started off fine. He was funny in a dry, sarcastic way that I liked. We talked about our favorite coffee spots, random shows we'd been watching, and how both of us were kind of over the whole let's get dinner thing for first dates. So we decided to meet up at a little cafe near downtown, the kind of place where the barista's got a nose ring, and they serve matcha lattes in ceramic mugs. When I walked in, I spotted him immediately. Brandon had that tall, broad-shouldered look that you'd expect from someone who spends a lot of time outdoors. He was wearing a black hoodie with a logo I didn't recognize and a pair of joggers that were somehow way too fancy for coffee. I waved and walked over, and he stood up and gave me a hug. The hug wasn't weird or anything. It was the kind of hug you give when you're trying to be casual but also a little excited, like you're happy to meet someone in person after chatting for a bit. We got our coffees and sat down. I won't lie, I was feeling good about it. He seemed like someone who could be fun to hang out with. At first, the conversation was normal. We talked about music, movies, and I learned he'd lived in a couple of different cities before settling here. He seemed interesting, but the longer we talked, the more I noticed this strange energy. It was like I was talking to someone who didn't really care about what I was saying, but was just waiting for me to finish so he could jump into whatever he wanted to say next. I'm not saying that's the worst thing in the world. A lot of people do that. But with Brandon, it was like he was doing it on purpose, like he was trying to control the conversation without being obvious about it. After about 20 minutes, he asked if I wanted to take a walk. I didn't mind. It was a nice day, and we were right near the river walk, so it seemed like a chill thing to do. We walked along the water, and as we strolled, he started telling me about how he used to be really into photography, but he didn't do it much anymore. Then, out of nowhere, he pulled his phone out and asked if he could take a picture of me. It wasn't the request that threw me off. It was how he asked. There was no explanation. No, I think you have a cool vibe, or you'd look great in a light. He just pulled the camera up and said, hold still. I told him I wasn't sure about that. It felt a little strange, but I figured maybe he just thought it'd be a fun moment to capture. He looked at me and raised an eyebrow and said, "Come on, just one shot. I promise I won't make you regret it." The tone of his voice wasn't playful. It was more like he was trying to convince me without really explaining why. Against my better judgment, I agreed. He took a few shots, told me I looked serene or whatever, and then handed me the phone to look at them. The first one was fine, but the next few. They were all of me looking awkward by a slightly squinted or mid-blink, and honestly, I looked terrible. I started to get this uneasy feeling. I was about to hand the phone back when he suddenly said, "Actually, I've got an idea. I'm gonna try something different." Before I could ask what he meant, he snapped another picture. This time, I was standing there with my back to him, and I hadn't even realized he'd moved behind me to take the shot. It felt wrong, but I didn't want to make a scene. I figured maybe he was just being artsy, but I couldn't shake the feeling something was off. We kept walking, and he didn't mention the photos again. But when we passed a bench, he asked if I wanted to sit. I did, and we kept talking, but the conversation started to feel like it was on autopilot. He'd ask questions, but they were always a little too personal. What's your biggest fear? Have you ever had your heart broken? What's the most embarrassing thing that's happened to you? I wasn't uncomfortable, but I was getting that vibe that he was trying to get me to say something specific, like he was testing me. At some point, I realized I'd been walking for almost an hour, and we were near an area I didn't recognize. I checked my phone to make sure I hadn't accidentally wandered off in the wrong direction, and that's when I saw it, a message from Brandon. He had texted me an hour ago saying, "We're gonna have some fun tonight. Trust me." My stomach sank. I hadn't seen him texting at all, and now here I was, deep in unfamiliar territory with this guy who seemed way too eager to take pictures of me and push me into conversations I wasn't ready for. I asked him if we could head back, but he brushed it off and said, "I promise we're almost there." I tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach, but I couldn't. I told him I had to go. He didn't protest too much, but as we walked back to the car, he said, I've been thinking about getting into documentary filmmaking. You're great on camera. Maybe I could film you sometime." I said no, got in my car, and drove home. I didn't hear from him after that, and I didn't try to reach out either. A few days later, I saw he had deleted his profile, and something about that felt final, like he knew what he'd done, or maybe had somehow caught out of the weirdness before he could push it any further. I still can't really explain what happened. Maybe it was just a miscommunication. Or maybe he was just one of those guys who thought women were just subjects for his art without ever stopping to ask if we were cool with it. But I'll tell you this, I've learned to trust my instincts a lot more after that night, because even if you think a date is just a simple coffee, it can quickly turn into something else. I don't know why I didn't notice the red flags sooner, but maybe it's because I wanted to believe that things could actually work out for once. I mean, it wasn't my first date. I wasn't new to this whole online thing, so I had a pretty solid radar for when things were off. Or at least I thought I did. But then Mia happened. We matched on a Saturday night. Her profile had that laid-back vibe I'm always drawn to. Coffee addict, bookworm. Will never judge you for your Spotify playlist. Her pictures were mostly candid shots, which was a nice change from the usual overly posed ones. There was one with her laughing at some coffee shop, another with a dog, I'm a sucker for dog pictures, and one with her sitting by a lake, looking like she had all the time in the world. We started talking, and it felt natural. We had a bunch in common. Both of us were into hiking, both of us loved indie movies, and we joked about how every meal on Instagram looks like it's been professionally styled. We exchanged numbers by the end of the night and planned to meet up for coffee the next day. She suggested a local place near the park that I'd never been to. It was a small, cozy spot, the kind where the barista probably knows half the customers by name. I got there a little early and waited outside, just watching people walk by, hoping she wouldn't be weirded out by my awkwardness. When Mina showed up, she was even cuter in person. No makeup, messy bun, jeans, and a hoodie. Simple but effortlessly cool. She waved as soon as she saw me, and I waved back, trying to act casual even though I was already nervous. We got our drinks and sat down by the window, the sunlight streaming in and giving everything that perfect Instagram glow. At first, the conversation was smooth. We talked about the usual things, work, family, our favorite shows. She mentioned she was in between jobs, trying to figure out what to do next, and that her current situation was kind of in flux. No big deal, right? I mean, who doesn't go through that? But as we kept talking, I started to notice little things. She'd mentioned something and then quickly gloss over it, like it wasn't important, but I could tell she was uncomfortable. When I asked about her family, she just said, "It's complicated," and changed the subject. When I asked about her ex, she looked away for a second, then said, "We don't really talk anymore. Just one of those things." Again, I brushed it off. I didn't want to push too hard, especially on a first date. Maybe she was just a private person. And besides, I'd already started to like her, and I didn't want to screw it up by being too nosy. But the more I listened, the more I realized that every time she said something, it was like there was a wall she was trying to keep up. She was pulling away without even realizing it. Then, after about 30 minutes, she suddenly got quiet. We were sitting there, sipping our drinks, and I could tell she was lost in thought. I asked if everything was okay, and she gave me this half smile, like she was trying to reassure me but wasn't sure how. "I don't know," she said finally, looking at me directly. "There's just something I have to tell you." My stomach dropped. I wasn't sure if she was going to drop some bombshell or if she was just trying to ease into a tough conversation. But either way, I could tell this wasn't going to be as simple as I thought. She took a deep breath and said, "I'm not really looking for a relationship. I'm not in a place where I can be what you need. You seem great, but I have a lot of stuff I'm dealing with right now and I don't want to drag you into it." I felt my face flush, but I tried to keep it together. I didn't want to make her feel bad for being upfront. So I nodded and said something about how I respected her honesty. But inside, I was confused. I didn't know what was going on. We just met, so how could she already know what I needed? She didn't seem to notice the way I was spiraling. She kept talking, but her words started to blur together. "I've just been through a lot of stuff. I was in a really toxic relationship for a while, and I don't think I can handle anything serious right now. I'm just trying to figure things out on my own." At this point, I was starting to wonder if I was the problem. Had I somehow done something wrong? Did I give off a vibe that made her think I was too serious? I didn't get it. This was a coffee date. Just coffee. There wasn't anything about it that screamed commitment. I tried to keep my cool, but I could tell she wasn't really listening to me. She was too focused on whatever inner struggle she was dealing with. I thought about leaving. I thought about just getting up and walking away because honestly, the whole situation felt off. But I didn't. I stayed. We kept talking, and she kept making excuses about why she couldn't be in a relationship right now. She talked about her ex again, and how he had messed things up for her, how he made her question everything about what she wanted. Eventually, the conversation turned into her just venting about her life. I didn't even feel like a person she was on a date with anymore. I felt like a therapist just sitting there while she spilled her guts. And it wasn't even like she was asking for advice. She was just talking. And I was listening, trying not to seem like I was getting uncomfortable. At some point, I realized this wasn't a date. This was just a one-sided therapy session. I wasn't being treated like someone she was interested in. I was just a sounding board. And honestly, I'd had enough. I finished my coffee, said I had to get going, and left. As I walked away, I looked back and saw her sitting there, staring out the window, lost in thought. She didn't even notice me leave. When I got home, I thought about messaging her. Maybe I could clear the air, maybe ask what had really been going on. But then I thought, why? She didn't want anything from me, and I wasn't about to be her emotional crutch. That was the last time I talked to Mia. I still don't really know what happened. Maybe she just wasn't ready. Maybe she wasn't looking for someone like me. Maybe I'd read the situation completely wrong. Either way, I learned something important. Sometimes, no matter how much you like someone, they can't give you what you want. And it's better to just walk away and save yourself the trouble. It was a random Tuesday night when I matched with Ben. I was on the app because I just ended a long-term relationship, and frankly, I wasn't looking for anything serious. I wanted to have some fun, maybe meet new people, and see where things went. Ben's profile didn't scream anything extraordinary. He was tall, blonde, with a photo of him hiking in the mountains and another of him at a concert. His bio just said, "Let's skip the small talk and see if we vibe," which honestly was a nice change from all of the looking for my lobster type bios. We started texting right away, and it was pretty chill. He seemed normal, funny even. We joked about how we both had terrible taste in movies and started talking about some concerts we'd been to. We exchanged a couple of memes, and I figured he was cool. We set up a time to meet at a bar a few days later. Nothing fancy, just a casual hangout. The night of our date, I walked into the bar and spotted him right away. Ben had that tall, athletic build that made him easy to pick out of a crowd. He was sitting at the bar, scrolling through his phone, and when he saw me walk in, he waved me over. He looked just like his photos. No surprises there. He stood up to greet me, and we gave each other a quick hug. We grabbed drinks and found a quiet corner of the bar. We chatted for a while about the usual stuff, what we did for work, what we liked to do for fun, all the basics. At first, everything was going smoothly. He was easy to talk to, and I started to think, okay, maybe this is exactly what I need. Nothing too serious, just a nice night out. But as the night wore on, things started to feel off. It was subtle at first. He'd ask me about my past relationships, and every time I gave a short answer, he pushed for more details. Like when I told him I'd been in a long-term relationship before, he asked why it ended. I explained that we'd just grown apart, nothing too dramatic. But then he kept pressing me on it, asking questions like, was there someone else? Or do you regret it? It was like he was fishing for something. At one point, he started talking about his ex, and I didn't think anything of it at first. He said they'd been together for a few years and had a pretty intense breakup. I nodded along and kept sipping my drink. But then, the more he talked about her, the more I realized that he hadn't quite gotten over it. He started to talk about how she ruined him and how he tried dating other people, but it was never the same. It was a little heavy, but I still didn't think much of it. People carried baggage, right? I could handle a bit of talk about exes. It's normal. Then it started to get weird. He asked if I'd ever been in love, and I said yes, I had been. I didn't go into detail, but then he asked, did you feel like that love was real? Or did you just think you were supposed to feel that way? I was a little taken aback. I mean, I don't know how deep you're supposed to get on a first date, but it was starting to feel like therapy. I tried to steer the conversation back to lighter topics, but it wasn't long before he was back on his ex. He mentioned how he still had some of her stuff at his place. Her favorite book, a jacket she left behind, even a pair of her shoes. I didn't know what to say. I told him maybe it was time to get rid of her stuff, but he just shrugged it off like it was no big deal. He said, it's just hard, you know? It's like, how do you just erase someone from your life after everything? I didn't know how to respond to that. I just nodded awkwardly, but inside I was starting to feel uncomfortable. I wasn't here to be his emotional crutch or therapist. I was just looking for a fun night, and instead, it felt like I was trying to help him get closure he clearly wasn't ready for. The conversation got more intense as the night went on. He kept talking about how hard it was to let go of the past and how it felt like he was stuck. I tried to relate, tell him that I understood what it was like to move on from someone, but every time I said something, it felt like he was just looking for validation that he was right to be stuck. At this point, I realized I was barely talking about myself. It was all about him and his emotional baggage. After a while, I started feeling trapped in the conversation. I didn't know how to end it without sounding like I wasn't interested, but I wasn't here to listen to him complain about his ex all night. I didn't sign up for that. Finally, I told him I had to get going. I tried to keep it light, said I had an early day, but I could tell that he wasn't ready to call it quits. He asked if we could hang out again sometime, and I told him I'd think about it. It wasn't a total lie. I just wasn't sure I wanted to go through another round of emotional unloading. I wasn't looking to fix someone. When I left, I felt like I was in a fog. I didn't know what had just happened. Part of me felt bad for him. Maybe he was going through something rough, and I was the one who happened to be there. But the other part of me just felt drained. I didn't want to be someone's rebound or a free therapist. I wanted to meet someone who could just enjoy a drink and some good conversation without carrying all of that emotional weight. I didn't text him after that night. A week later, I saw he deleted his profile. Maybe he was just in a bad place, or maybe he realized I wasn't going to be the person to fix him. Either way, I didn't feel any relief about it. I just felt like I had dodged a bullet. It wasn't the first day I had been on since my breakup, and it definitely wasn't the last. But it was the one that made me realize I didn't want to be anyone's emotional baggage handler. It was a wake-up call that sometimes people are carrying way more than you're prepared to deal with. It was a Friday night when I matched with Olivia. I had just moved to the city a few weeks ago, and honestly, I was looking for a way to meet people. I didn't expect to find someone I actually clicked with. When I saw Olivia's profile, something about her made me stop scrolling. She had this confident vibe, like she knew exactly who she was, and I appreciated that. Her bio wasn't a cliche either. It just said, I'm here for good conversation and bad decisions. The first thing I noticed was how quick she was with her responses. Like, we went from, hey, how's it going? texting about random stuff in less than an hour. She was funny, sarcastic, and had a kind of raw energy that made me want to know more. We talked about everything: music, travel, what we thought about the best pizza place in the city, even conspiracy theories. It was one of those conversations that felt so easy. I was honestly surprised when she suggested we meet up. We agreed on a bar downtown. I got there early, grabbed a seat, and waited. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She was wearing this leather jacket and boots that made her look like she'd just stepped out of a music video. She had a presence about her that made everyone else in the room seem a little less interesting. We greeted each other, and as soon as she sat down, I couldn't help but notice how intense her gaze was. It wasn't like she was staring at me, but more like she was trying to figure me out, which I guess should have been my first red flag. But I didn't care. We were vibing, and I thought, what could go wrong? We ordered drinks. As we started chatting, it was clear she wasn't afraid to speak her mind. I liked that at first. It felt refreshing. She talked about how she hated small talk, how she wasn't really into dating apps, but somehow kept using them because it was easier than meeting people in person. We traded stories about awful first dates, and I was laughing the whole time. It felt like one of those nights where everything was going well, until it didn't. As the night went on, Olivia started asking more and more personal questions, but in a way that made it feel like she was testing me. "What's your biggest fear?" she asked at one point. I laughed it off, saying I wasn't a fan of spiders, but she didn't laugh with me. She just looked at me like I hadn't given her the right answer. I felt a little weird, but I shrugged it off. Then came the next one. "How do you feel about commitment?" This time, I didn't know how to answer. Was this a weird interview? I said something vague, like, "I think it depends on the person." She seemed satisfied with that response and took a sip of her drink. But after that, the tone of the conversation started to shift. It was like she was probing for something deeper, but not in a friendly way. She asked if I'd ever been heartbroken. And when I said yes, she followed up with, "What did you do about it? Did you let it define you?" That was when I started to feel a little off. It wasn't the kind of question you ask on a casual date. It felt like she was trying to figure out if I was emotionally damaged or something. I wasn't used to being interrogated like this. I was starting to feel like I was being put on trial. But I didn't want to seem like I was backing out, so I kept answering. She told me about her past relationships. She seemed to have a lot of them. She said she'd never been able to make things last because guys never understood her, and that she'd always ended up getting bored. It was a little sad to hear, but I didn't say much. I figured it was just part of the conversation. But then the questions started to get more personal, and I started feeling more and more uncomfortable. She asked me about my exes, but she didn't just want to know who they were or what happened. She asked how often I thought about them, what I missed about them, how long it took me to get over them. I kept trying to steer the conversation back to something more casual, but Olivia wasn't having it. She was on a mission. I tried changing the subject to something light, like the last trip I'd gone on, but she didn't even let me finish before she interrupted. "Do you ever feel like you're just running from things? Like maybe you're not really ready to be with someone?" I had no idea how to respond to that. What was I supposed to say? Was she accusing me of something? Or was she just testing me to see if I'd admit to some deep-seated issue? I felt like I was trapped in her web of questions, and no matter what I said, it wasn't going to be the right answer. My mind started racing and I could feel my heart beating faster. I had no idea where this was going, but I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. She could see I was getting uncomfortable, though, and she changed gears. She smiled a little too widely and said, "I'm just messing with you." I like to see how people react when they think they're being psychoanalyzed. She laughed it off, but the joke didn't land. To me, it felt like she had been trying to get into my head the entire time. I didn't like that feeling at all. I sat there for a moment trying to figure out if I was overreacting or if something really was off. The energy at the table had completely shifted. Olivia had gone from being this confident, fun girl to someone who seemed almost predatory. Not in a physical way, but mentally, like she was trying to pick apart my thoughts and feelings to see if I was worthy of her time. At that point, I decided I needed to leave. I told her I had an early morning and I had a great time, but I needed to head out. She didn't protest, but as I stood up, she said something that made my skin crawl. "You'll think about me tonight, won't you?" I can tell when someone's interested, even if they don't admit it. I smiled, but it didn't feel genuine. I paid for my drink and walked out of the bar, trying to shake off the weird vibe she'd given me. I never messaged her after that night, and she never texted me again either. I guess we were both playing some game. But for me, I realized that sometimes what seems like a fun, carefree day can turn into something completely different. Sometimes people don't just want to connect with you, they want to dissect you. And I wasn't about to stick around for that. It was a Tuesday when I matched with Kayla. Honestly, I didn't even expect it to go anywhere. It was late, I was tired. I was just scrolling through my Tinder app with no real intention of meeting anyone. But then his profile caught my eye. He had this rugged outdoorsy look, the kind of guy who'd probably have a beard, live in a cabin somewhere, and drink craft beer. His bio was short but funny. Not here for a lifetime of happiness, just looking for someone to grab a beer and talk about the meaning of life. I liked that. It was simple and real. It didn't scream, "I'm perfect for you," or "let's make this a love story," which honestly was what I needed. I was coming off a rough couple of months after a messy breakup, so the last thing I wanted was to dive headfirst into something serious. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed naturally. We talked about music, hiking, books, basically all the stuff I liked. There was no pressure, just a back and forth banter that made me laugh. By the end of the night, we had set up a date for that weekend. He suggested grabbing a beer at a brewery downtown, and I agreed. It seemed casual enough, so why not? When I showed up at the brewery on Saturday, I didn't know what to expect. I had no idea if Caleb was going to be exactly like his pictures or if I'd be walking into some awkward situation. But then I saw him. He was sitting at the bar, nursing a drink, and he looked exactly like his profile. The beard, the rugged style, the laid-back vibe. Honestly, he looked even better in person. We exchanged greetings, and after some awkward small talk, we settled into a nice rhythm. We grabbed our drinks, and the conversation took off from there. We talked about our favorite places to travel, favorite hikes, and of course, our favorite beers. I was surprised by how easy it was to talk to him. It didn't feel forced, like I had experienced with other dates. He was funny, charming, and seemed like someone I could actually enjoy spending time with. But as the night wore on, something started to feel off. It wasn't anything specific at first, just this weird nagging feeling in the back of my mind. I couldn't place it. Caleb wasn't saying anything alarming, and he didn't seem creepy or anything. It was just this weird energy. I pushed it down and kept talking to him, but it kept lingering. At some point, he started talking about his past relationships. He told me he'd been in a few long-term relationships, but that they'd never worked out. He said something along the lines of, "I'm just one of those guys who loves too hard, and they can't handle it." I didn't think much of it at first, but as he went on, I started to notice a pattern in the way he talked about his exes. It was always their fault. They couldn't keep up with me, or they just didn't get me, or I don't know why they left, but I guess it was just their loss. There was always this underlying theme of him being the victim in every breakup. The more he talked, the more I started to notice low red flags. He said his last girlfriend had cheated on him, but instead of being upset or angry, he seemed almost indifferent, like it didn't bother him at all. It was almost like he was just telling me a story, not something that had actually hurt him. I'm not one to judge someone's past, but the way he was talking made me uncomfortable. It was as if he didn't take any responsibility for what had happened in those relationships. It felt like he was just trying to make himself sound like this tragic hero who was misunderstood by the world. And honestly, I wasn't buying it. We kept talking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I was starting to feel like I was being manipulated, but I couldn't figure out why or how. He wasn't being overtly pushy or weird, but it was like he was trying to get me to feel sorry for him without actually saying it. Eventually, he shifted the conversation to something more personal. He asked about my own relationships and was honest. I told him about my last serious relationship, how it ended, and how it had taken me a while to get over it. I wasn't going to lie, I didn't want to come off as perfect. But when I told him it ended because we just weren't right for each other, he didn't react the way I expected. Instead of being understanding, he started asking me questions like, what was it that you weren't getting from him? Did you feel neglected? It was almost like he was trying to point out flaws in my past relationship, like I had somehow been at fault. It felt weird. The whole conversation felt like a mind game. He wasn't listening to me. He was just looking for ways to make me feel insecure about my own choices. And for some reason, I didn't know how to stop it. Every time I tried to steer the conversation back to something neutral, he would find a way to bring it back to relationships or the failures of others. At one point, he said something that made my stomach drop. I've always had trouble trusting people, but I think you're different. You don't seem like the type to lie or play games. I bet you never hurt anyone the way other people have hurt me. That comment stuck with me. It was like he was planting a seed in my head, trying to make me feel responsible for his past pain. It wasn't subtle. It was manipulative, and I started to feel like I was in the middle of some emotional chess game that I didn't want to be a part of. I didn't know how to get out of it. I didn't want to be rude, but at the same time, I didn't want to get caught up in whatever this was. I ended the night as gracefully as I could, saying I needed to get going. I told him I had a good time, but I wasn't sure if I was feeling a connection. I didn't need to explain myself further. I just knew that I didn't want to be around him anymore. I haven't heard from Caleb since that night. I don't even feel bad about it. I think he was looking for someone to fix him, and I wasn't that person. I was about to get sucked into his game. I'd rather be alone than deal with someone who tried to manipulate my emotions. It was one of those quiet nights when I matched with Hannah. I wasn't expecting much, just another random swipe to pass the time. But then her profile caught my eye. She had a photo of herself standing in front of some old bookstore, a huge smile on her face, and her bio simply said, "Let's talk about books, coffee, and bad decisions." I thought it sounded kind of refreshing. Most of the bios I came across were either creamy or vague, so hers stood out. We started chatting right away. At first, it was the usual small talk, what books we were into, favorite coffee spots, that kind of thing. But as the conversation went on, she got more intense. Not in a bad way, but it was clear she wasn't the type to beat around the bush. Every question felt like she was trying to figure something out. And honestly, I was kind of intrigued. She didn't ask the typical, "What do you do for work?" or "What's your favorite color?" type questions. No, she was asking about my childhood, my biggest regrets, and how I viewed the future. I guess I wasn't used to someone being that direct, but it didn't feel forced, so I rolled with it. She sent a message a few hours later asking if I wanted to meet up for coffee the next day. I was down, so we made plans to meet at a cafe I had never been to. When I arrived, I saw her sitting at a table by the window. She looked exactly like her pictures, dark hair, piercing eyes, and a look that made it clear she wasn't interested in wasting anyone's time. I liked that about her. We exchanged greetings and ordered our drinks. As we sat down, the conversation was easy at first. We talked about the books we were reading, shared some funny anecdotes about our lives, and laughed. I thought, okay, this is going well. But then, after about 20 minutes, the mood shifted. She started talking about her past relationships, and it was intense. Not that I minded. I've always believed that being open and honest about your past is important, but the way she spoke was different. It was like she was putting all her emotional baggage out on the table, as if she was daring me to take it or leave it. She mentioned her ex in a way that made me feel uncomfortable. It wasn't that she was bad-mouthing him, she was just blunt. He was a nice guy, she said, but I always felt like I was doing all the emotional labor in the relationship. I don't know if he even cared about me. Maybe I just wasn't enough. Her words were matter of fact, like she was recounting a story from a book, but it didn't feel like she had fully processed it. She said it so casually that it almost seemed like she was testing me, seeing if I would sympathize or offer some advice. I tried to offer a little support, saying that sometimes relationships don't work out because both people aren't in the same place. I thought it was a good neutral response, but instead of thanking me or agreeing, she turned the tables. "Do you think I'm just messed up?" she asked. "Because I'm not sure I even know what I want anymore. I keep getting in these toxic situations, but I keep going back to them. Like, I know I shouldn't, but I just can't help it." I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't a therapist and this was getting heavy, but I didn't want to be rude, so I nodded and said that relationships could be complicated sometimes, and that maybe she just needed time to figure things out. But then she got more specific. She started asking about my own relationships and what had gone wrong in them. At first, I was happy to answer, but then she asked, "What was the hardest thing you've ever had to let go of?" A person, a dream, a part of yourself. I was thrown off. We weren't even an hour into the date, and it felt like I was spilling my soul to her. I hadn't signed up for this deep dive, but for some reason I felt compelled to answer, so I gave her a vague, surface-level response about how sometimes we outgrow people or situations. I noticed her eyes seemed to gleam when I said that, like she was waiting for more, like she was studying me. I started to feel like I was under a microscope, and everything I said was being analyzed. It wasn't that she was being rude, but it felt like she was pulling at threads of my life just to see how I would react. The turning point came when she started talking about something that was clearly still raw for her, her relationship with her family. She spoke about her parents like they were strangers, like they didn't even know her. It wasn't normal to hear someone talk about their parents like that, especially on a first date. She said, "My family doesn't get me. I always feel like I'm not enough for them, no matter how hard I try. And honestly, I don't know if I'll ever be able to fix that." I could feel the weight of her words, but at the same time, I was starting to get the feeling that she wasn't looking for a conversation. She was looking for validation. She was testing me to see if I would tell her she was right. If I would agree that her family was a problem, not her. I tried to stay neutral, but she kept pushing. "Do you think I'm messed up for not being able to fix things with them?" she asked. "Is it just me, or do people always abandon you when you need them the most?" I sat there for a second, trying to figure out how to respond without making it worse. I said, "I think everyone has their own struggles with family. It's hard, but I don't think it's fair to say it's all on you." Her face shifted in that moment. It was subtle, but I could tell I hadn't said what she wanted to hear. She took a long sip of her coffee, and the conversation stalled for a while. The energy in the room was off. I could feel it, but I didn't know how to fix it. I made a quick exit after that. I didn't want to be rude, but the vibe was just off. The conversation had taken a turn I wasn't ready for, and honestly, I felt drained. I wasn't there to be her emotional outlet, and I wasn't sure I was the right person to help her work through whatever issues she was dealing with. It wasn't a bad date, it was just a little too much too soon. I haven't heard from her since that day, and honestly, I don't think I ever will. I didn't want to ghost her, but I also didn't want to get involved in a situation where I felt like I was being pulled into someone else's emotional chaos. It was clear that she was still trying to figure herself out, and I wasn't in a place to help her do that. Some people just need more than you're able to give, and that's okay. I never thought I'd meet someone like Marcus on Tinder. The guy's profile was so basic I almost swiped left. He had a picture of him standing by a lake, a hoodie on, smiling like he was some kind of Instagram influencer, but not in a cringy way. His bio was straight to the point. "Just here to see if we vibe, nothing crazy." I wasn't sure if I was down for something crazy, but at the time, I was in a bit of a dry spell, so I swiped right. A few hours later, we matched, and the conversation started off pretty normal. He asked what I was into. I mentioned I liked going to concerts, reading, and spending time outdoors. He said he was into the same stuff, and it seemed like we had a lot of common interests. We talked about music and what we had been listening to recently, all the usual stuff. There wasn't anything remarkable about the conversation, but he seemed nice enough, and I was getting the vibe that he wasn't one of those guys who immediately asked about plans for a date after 2 messages. After a couple of days of chatting back and forth, Marcus suggested we meet up for a drink at this bar downtown. I liked the idea. It felt casual, no pressure. So we set a date for the weekend. Honestly, at this point, I didn't think much of it. It was just another Tinder date to check off the list. But something about his messages made me feel like he was a little more into it than I was. I wasn't sure what it was, but I agreed and we locked in the plans. I arrived at the bar a little early, which is always my thing. I hate being late. I found a seat at the bar, ordered a drink, and waited. A few minutes later, I saw Marcus walking in, scanning the room. He spotted me, smiled, and made his way over. He looked pretty much how I expected. Tall, a little lanky, dark hair, and dressed in a casual jacket. Nothing over the top, but enough to look put together. We exchanged greetings, and right away the vibe was relaxed. We got our drinks, and it was easy to talk. We joked about how proud the bar was, talked about work, and then started talking about our families. I thought it was a pretty typical date, nothing too out of the ordinary. But then the conversation started shifting, and things got weird. Marcus started talking about his last relationship, and it didn't take long for him to get intense, like asterisk really asterisk intense. I expected the usual "we broke up because things didn't work out" spiel, but that's not what I got. He started telling me about his ex, how she was crazy and couldn't handle him. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then he kept going, saying things like she never understood me and she was so jealous she couldn't trust me at all. I tried to be sympathetic, but I started to get this weird feeling. It wasn't the usual "let me vent" kind of energy. It was more like he was trying to get me to feel sorry for him. I tried to steer the conversation to lighter topics, but he kept coming back to her. He even pulled out his phone and started showing me pictures of them together, saying, "This is us on a trip to the beach," but it didn't end well. She accused me of cheating, even though I didn't do anything. I started to feel uncomfortable. It was like he was trying to paint himself as a victim in every situation. as if the breakup wasn't his fault at all. He then dropped something that really made me pause. He said, "I always try to be loyal, but it seems like women just can't handle me." The way he said it wasn't casual. It was almost like he was fishing for reassurance. I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't sure if he was just venting or if he was trying to manipulate me into feeling like I had to reassure him that he was a perfect guy and all his exes were the problem. At this point, I was starting to get that feeling. You know, the one where you start wondering if you're dealing with someone who's a little too into their own narrative. I tried to tell him that relationships are complicated and that maybe he wasn't seeing his part in things, but he wasn't really having it. He brushed it off like it was nothing and then shifted the conversation back to me. He asked about my past relationships, and I thought, okay, fair enough, he's just curious. But then he asked a question that made me uncomfortable. Have you ever been in a relationship where you gave so much of yourself and still felt like you weren't enough? I paused, not sure how to answer. Honestly, I didn't think it was a bad question. It just felt loaded. It felt like he was trying to get me to admit something about myself, something deep. I answered honestly, saying that I had relationships where things didn't work out, but I didn't feel like it was because I wasn't enough. I just didn't think we were right for each other. That's when he made this strange comment. Yeah, but I bet you've had guys who just didn't appreciate you. I don't think they understood what they had. He said it with this tone like he was trying to make me feel good about myself, but it felt condescending. He wasn't just complimenting me. He was trying to convince me that all my exes had messed up, and I was the one who deserved better. That's when the red flags started popping up all over the place. Marcus was playing this weird game where he was trying to make me feel special, but it didn't feel genuine. It felt like he was manipulating me into thinking I owed him something, like I should feel bad for him and give him a chance because, according to him, all his exes had been the problem. I finished my drink quickly and tried to wrap things up. I told him I had to go and he walked me out, but not before making a strange comment about how maybe we'll have another chance if I'm not too busy with my other distractions. The way he said it felt like a veiled threat. I wasn't sure if it was intentional or if I was just reading too much into it, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. I haven't heard from Marcus since that night, and honestly, I'm not sure I ever will. I didn't block him, but I haven't responded to any of his texts either. Something about the way he tried to manipulate the conversation, always positioning himself as the victim, rubbed me the wrong way. Maybe he's just been through a lot, but I wasn't about to get involved in whatever game he was playing. Sometimes it's better to walk away before things get messier than they need to be. It was a Friday night, and I had just gotten off work. I was tired, and honestly just wanted to go home, throw on some comfy clothes, and binge watch something mindless. But then I remembered Jenna. We had been talking for a couple of weeks on Tinder, and she seemed really chill. Her profile was fun, with a couple of cute pictures of her at a music festival and a trip to the mountains. Her bio was simple, looking for someone who doesn't take themselves too seriously and loves to laugh. She seemed like someone I could hang out with. We had talked about grabbing a drink for a while, and after a few back and forths, we finally decided on a casual bar in the city. I wasn't expecting fireworks or anything, but I was curious enough to meet her. I've been on a lot of Tinder dates, but I was hoping this one would at least feel real. You know, like the kind of vibe where you could actually talk and enjoy someone's company. I got to the bar a little early, like always, and grabbed a seat by the window. It was a dimly lit, cozy place, the kind of bar that felt more like a hidden gem than a tourist trap. The kind of place where you could actually hear someone talk without having to yell over the music. After about 15 minutes of me scrolling mindlessly through my phone, I saw her walk in. She looked like her pictures, blonde hair, dressed casually in a black leather jacket and jeans. She had a warm smile, and when she saw me, she came over, introduced herself, and we hugged it out. Everything seemed normal. She wasn't overdressed or trying to act too cool, which was refreshing. The conversation started off smooth, how work was going, what we were looking for, that kind of thing. She was nice, easy to talk to, so far so good. But then it started to get off. At first, I thought it was just me being paranoid. Maybe I wasn't in the best headspace, or maybe I was overthinking it. But the more we talked, the more I started to notice that something wasn't quite right. We talked about our past relationships, and she mentioned her exes. That's always a tricky subject, but she didn't seem to dwell on it too much. Just said her last relationship ended because he couldn't handle my vibe, which is definitely one of those phrases that's a little too vague for my liking, but I brushed it off. Then she casually said something like, "I'm the kind of girl who's always a little too much for people. Most guys can't keep up with me. They just don't get it. Now, I know everyone has their own take on breakups and their reasons, but there was something about the way she said it that made me pause. It wasn't like she was just stating a fact. She was almost bragging about it, like it was something she was proud of. It wasn't the kind of vibe I was used to when people talked about relationships. I wasn't sure if I was just misreading it, but I could feel this weird tension hanging in the air. We moved on to talking about hobbies, and she told me she loved hiking and outdoor activities. "You should come with me sometime," she said, which sounded harmless enough. But then she added, "I like to get out and push myself. I mean, I'm not going to lie, I've had to leave a few guys behind on hikes because they weren't in shape. But I've got to do me." Again, I laughed, thinking she was just being playful, but there was this undertone of superiority. Like she was trying to show how much more active, fit, and mentally tough she was than the average guy. It wasn't that I was offended or anything. I'm pretty fit myself, but something about the way she said it made me feel like I was supposed to prove something to her, like I had to match her energy or somehow live up to this expectation she was saying. I started feeling uncomfortable. I don't know if it was the pressure or just the weird way she kept making everything seem like a test, but it didn't sit right with me. I tried to shift the conversation to something neutral, but it didn't help. She started telling me about how much she hated weak men who complain about everything or can't handle their emotions. That's when I started getting the feeling that she wasn't just saying these things for fun. It felt like she was painting a picture of what she thought a perfect guy should be, and it definitely didn't sound like me. I don't know if it was the alcohol kicking in, but I found myself starting to tune out a bit. She was still going off on her rants about being independent and not needing anyone to save her, and how she was always the one to pick up the slack in her relationships because guys couldn't handle the chaos of her life. I tried to keep my responses light, but I realized something. Every time she talked about her past or her relationships, it was always someone else's fault. Every breakup was about how she had been let down by guys who just didn't get her or who couldn't keep up. There was no room for nuance in her story. It was always "I'm the best and they failed me." That's when I realized Janet wasn't looking for a partner. She was looking for someone to validate her narrative, someone who would tell her she was always right. She didn't need someone to compliment her life. She needed someone who would agree with her view of the world. At this point, I was starting to feel trapped in the conversation. I wasn't trying to argue or challenge her. I just wanted to get out of this weird vibe we had going on. She hadn't once asked me about my life. It was all about her, all about what she thought was wrong with everyone else, all about how hard her life had been and how she had to do everything on her own. I was just there, and honestly, I wasn't sure I could handle it much longer. I wrapped up the date after about an hour, saying I had an early day tomorrow. She was fine with it, almost relieved, but I could tell she was a little disappointed. As I said goodbye and left the bar, I felt a little guilty, but I knew I couldn't do another date like that. I've never been into people who talk so highly of themselves while dragging others down. It wasn't even about her being independent or strong. It was the way she spoke about other people as if they were always a problem. I haven't heard from her since. I didn't block her, but I'm not sure I want to continue the conversation. She seemed like someone who wasn't willing to meet someone halfway, and honestly, I'm just not interested in that. Maybe she's looking for validation in her life, and maybe she'll find it with someone else, but it wasn't going to be with me. I had just moved to the city a few months ago, and I figured I might as well try Tinder to meet people. I wasn't expecting anything too serious. I just wanted to meet some new faces, maybe make a friend or two. I swiped through a few profiles, but then I saw Tina's. Her profile was simple but intriguing. A couple of pictures of her at the beach, one with her dog, another with a group of friends at a concert. She had a bio that was short but sweet, looking for a connection, not games. It caught my attention because, at that point, I was pretty tired of the whole hookup scene. I was looking for something real too. We matched pretty quickly, and after a day of small talk, we decided to grab a coffee at a place downtown. It felt like a safe bet, a low-pressure situation where we could talk without being stuck in some noisy bar. I showed up a little early, which is kind of my thing. I grabbed a seat by the window, watching the people walk by, trying not to feel nervous. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was excited to meet her. Tina seemed down to earth in her messages, easy to talk to. Nothing over the top, but she definitely seemed like someone I could vibe with. When she walked in, I recognized her right away. She was tall, with dark hair that framed her face perfectly. She was wearing a simple white sweater and jeans, no makeup but still somehow looking flawless. She smiled when she saw me, and it was like everything clicked into place. We exchanged the usual greetings and everything felt easy. She was just a charming in person, and we quickly started chatting about how we both ended up in the city. Things started off normal. She told me about her job, how she had just moved to the city too, and how she was still figuring things out. I liked that she wasn't all put together pretending to have everything figured out. It felt like we were on the same wavelength. The conversation was flowing light and fun until she dropped a comment that made me stop mid-sip of my coffee. She was talking about her ex. I wasn't too surprised. A lot of people bring up past relationships early on, especially on dates. But what she said was strange. She casually mentioned how she had been in a toxic relationship for way too long, and then said, honestly, I'm still recovering from it. But now that I'm over it, I feel like I'm better than ever. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, we'd all have baggage, right? But then she kept going, mentioning how her ex had ruined her self-esteem and made her feel worthless. Again, it was all fine until she dropped the bomb. I'm actually really proud of myself for getting out of that mess, she said. I know it was hard, but I was never going to let him hold me back. I tried to be supportive. I mean, breakups are tough, and I've been through my share of them. But the way she was talking, it didn't feel like she was just venting. It felt like she was trying to paint herself as this hero for getting out of it. She wasn't just recovering. She was positioning herself as someone who had won by leaving that relationship, like she had somehow come out on top in some epic battle. As we continued talking, I started to notice a pattern. Every time she talked about her past, it was always about how she had been a victim, how she had been mistreated or misunderstood. And don't get me wrong, everyone has their own side of the story, but the way she framed everything made it seem like she was the only one who mattered. She never mentioned any mistakes she might have made. It was like she was perfect, just trying to escape the clutches of a bad relationship that had dragged her down for too long. And then there was the tone. She kept saying things like, I'd never let anyone control me and I don't take shit from people anymore. But there was something about the way she said it that started to feel off. It wasn't confidence, it was arrogance. It felt like she was trying to make me feel sorry for her, like I was supposed to tell her how amazing she was for getting out of that situation. She wasn't talking about growth or moving on. She was talking about how much better she was than her ex, how she was above it all. It was a turnoff, honestly. I don't think I was the only one who picked up on it. As we talked more, the conversation started to feel less like two people getting to know each other and more like a performance. She was putting on the show, trying to convince me she was the smartest, strongest person in the room. Every other sentence had to be about how much she had learned or how far she'd come since that relationship. It wasn't even that she was bragging about her growth. It was more like she was flaunting it in a way that made me feel like I had to prove myself to her. I tried to steer the conversation back to something else, but it didn't work. She kept circling back to herself, talking about how much she deserved now, how she would never settle again, how people like her ex would never stand a chance with her. It started to feel like she was looking for validation, not from me as a potential partner, but from me as someone who could confirm that she had done the right thing by leaving that toxic relationship. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't want to argue with her or make her feel bad, but I could tell that this wasn't a conversation I wanted to be part of. I told her I had to leave, something about an early morning meeting the next day. She was fine with it, though she didn't seem all that disappointed. In fact, I almost felt like she was relieved that I didn't try to press her for details or ask questions about her ex. She didn't need that. She didn't need me. She just needed to feel like she was in control. I haven't heard from her since that day. I didn't block her, but I never responded to any of her follow-up messages. Honestly, I just didn't think we were a good fit. Tina was a strong, independent woman, sure, but it felt like she had built her entire identity around the idea of being a survivor, someone who would overcome all the bullshit and came out on top. The problem was that she seemed so focused on how great she was that she never took a second to acknowledge anyone else. I don't know if it was arrogance or just a defense mechanism, but either way, it wasn't something I wanted to get involved in. It was a Sunday evening when I first matched with Jake on Tinder. I had just gotten out of a long, exhausting week, and I wasn't really expecting much. Honestly, I was just scrolling through my phone to kill time before I had to head to bed and prepare for the work week ahead. But then his profile popped up, Jake, 28, living in the city, a few pictures of him at some fancy event, and another one with a dog. His bio was simple, looking for someone real, not fake. It wasn't the most creative bio, but something about it caught my attention. He seemed like the kind of guy who wasn't trying too hard. And honestly, that's the bio I was looking for. After a quick glance, I swiped right. He messaged me almost immediately, which I guess was a good sign. We exchanged a few texts, the usual stuff, or we worked what we'd like to do on weekends, that kind of thing. He seemed normal enough. His responses were witty without being over the top. I found myself smiling at some of the things he said. We were getting along well enough to plan a date. He suggested a bar not far from where I lived, a nice, low-key place. We settled on Thursday night. The day of the date, I was a little nervous, but not in a bad way. I was excited to meet him in person, see if the chemistry we had over text translated to real life. I put on my favorite outfit, did my makeup, and left the house a little earlier than planned because, it's always better to be early than late, right? I got there first, found the table at a window, and ordered a drink to settle my nerves. Jake showed up right on time. He walked in looking just like his pictures. Tall, dark-haired, wearing a nice jacket, but still casual enough that he didn't look like he was trying too hard. He smiled when he saw me, and we hugged awkwardly for a moment. A typical first date thing. I liked him right away. We ordered drinks, and after a few minutes of small talk, the conversation started flowing easily. It felt natural. But then, 30 minutes in, things started to take a turn. He casually mentioned that he'd just moved to the city recently. I asked him about it, curious as to why he made the move. That's when he dropped the first bomb. Well, I had to leave my last place. Things just didn't work out with my roommates. I raised an eyebrow, trying to figure out what exactly that meant. He quickly added, they were kind of lazy. Not really my vibe. I need people who were on the same level as me. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured it was just one of those things. People had their reasons for moving. But then he started going into detail about how his previous roommates were freeloaders and didn't understand the hustle. It wasn't just a simple complaint. It was a judgment. He kept going on about how he couldn't stand people who didn't have their shit together. It was as if he was trying to paint himself as this perfect, successful guy who had everything figured out. He was, in his words, always working hard, always improving himself, always grinding. I'm all for ambition, but there was something about the way he said it that started to feel off. He wasn't just sharing a part of his life, he was bragging. It was subtle at first, but then it became more and more apparent. He mentioned how he had recently gotten promoted at work, how he made more money than most people his age, and how he had a strategic approach to everything. He was positioning himself as someone who was just above the average person, and it wasn't sitting well with me. I tried to steer the conversation in a different direction, maybe to something a little more lighthearted, but he kept circling back to how successful he was. He mentioned his travels and how he was always working on side projects and never wasting time. At one point, he even said, I just can't be around people who don't have ambition. It's like, what's the point of hanging out with someone if they're not pushing themselves? I don't know what it was, but I started to feel uncomfortable. I wasn't trying to compare myself to him, but I realized I was getting kind of fed up with the constant self-promotion. It wasn't even like he was doing it in a boastful way. He was doing it in a way that made it seem like I was supposed to admire him for it. Like, he wanted me to acknowledge how much better he was than everyone else. It was exhausting. I wanted to be polite, so I continued listening, but I couldn't help but notice how he kept talking about other people's flaws. At one point, he said something like, you wouldn't believe how many people I know who waste their time complaining about their lives. I don't have time for people like that. I mean, if you're not actively improving, what's the point? I wasn't sure if he was trying to impress me or if he just genuinely didn't realize how condescending he sounded. I've met people who were proud of their accomplishments, sure, but there was always a sense of humility behind it. With Jake, though, it felt like a constant stream of self-promotion. I don't know if it was the alcohol or just me being over it, but it started to make me feel like I was wasting my time sitting there. So I did what I thought was best. I wrapped it up. I told him I was tired and had an early day the next morning, and I got up to leave. He seemed a little caught off guard, which surprised me, but he didn't argue. He paid for the drinks, and we exchanged a quick, awkward hug before I headed out. I didn't block him, but I never responded to his follow-up messages. Honestly, it just wasn't the right fit. Jake seemed like a guy who had everything figured out, but in reality, he was too focused on himself to see that he was coming across as pretentious. I'm all for someone being driven, but there's a fine line between ambition and arrogance. And to be honest, I wasn't interested in being part of his constant hustle. I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting anything to come from my match with Emma on Tinder. I was scrolling through the app like I normally did, just killing time between work and Netflix when I came across her profile. Her pictures were simple, just her at a coffee shop, another at a party, and one more where she looked like she was on vacation, posing by the beach with sunglasses. Her bio was basic but intriguing. Life's too short for bad coffee and bad company. A bit cliche, sure, but I liked it. It was a nice change from the endless bios that just said adventurous or just here to meet new people. We matched and started chatting almost immediately. The conversation was normal at first, just the usual, hey, how's your day? Kind of thing. She seemed friendly, easygoing, and funny in the little texts she sent. The more we talked, the more I found myself interested in meeting her. After a few days of texting, she suggested we grab a drink at a bar near my place. I agreed, thinking it would be a nice way to end my week. When I showed up, I was a little early, which is usually my thing. I grabbed a table near the back, ordered a drink, and waited. A few minutes later, I saw her walk in, and it was just like her pictures. Blonde, dressed casually but in a way that made her look effortlessly stylish. She waved when she spotted me, and I smiled, standing up to greet her. We hugged, and she sat down, asking if I wanted to grab another drink. The conversation was light at first, talking about our jobs, what we'd like to do on weekends, favorite movies. It was fun, but then, out of nowhere, she dropped something weird. She mentioned how she didn't really get along with her parents anymore. I didn't think much of it at first, but then she went into this long rant about how they were toxic and how she had to cut them off for her own mental health. At first, I just nodded, trying to be supportive. I mean, everyone has family issues, right? But then it started getting more intense. She started talking about how her parents had always been controlling and how she had to escape their grip. The way she said it made it seem like she was a victim in some kind of major struggle. She even said that when she was younger, she felt stifled by them, like she wasn't allowed to be herself. I was starting to feel a little uncomfortable, but I didn't want to interrupt her, so I kept listening. As she continued, though, I started to pick up on something. It wasn't just a one-time thing or a past issue. She seemed really bitter about it, like she hadn't moved past it at all. It wasn't just about her parents. She started talking about other people in her life the same way. She mentioned a few friends she had fallen out with, and then she went on a rant about how most people are fake and can't be trusted. I don't know what it was, but as she went on, I started to realize something. It wasn't just her parents or a couple of friends. It seemed like Emma had some serious issues with anyone who didn't meet her expectations. She kept talking about how everyone always lets her down and how she couldn't deal with fake people anymore. I tried to change the topic, but every time I did, she would bring it back to how she had been wronged by people in her life. It became clear that her entire outlook was shaped by this bitter attitude toward people who didn't meet her standards. It was getting harder to ignore. She wasn't just telling stories anymore. She was painting herself as some kind of martyr, someone who had suffered because of everyone else's flaws. And it wasn't just about the past. She kept saying things like, I don't trust anyone anymore, and I can't let people in. It's too risky. It wasn't healthy, and I realized it wasn't the kind of energy I wanted in my life. She was so consumed by what others had done to her that she couldn't see how she was pushing people away. I don't know why I didn't leave sooner. Maybe I thought it was just a phase, or maybe I was hoping she'd open up and show a different side of herself. But it didn't happen. As the night went on, her bitterness only seemed to grow. She made comments about how people always expect too much from her, how she gave and gave but never got anything back. It was exhausting. At that point, I realized there was no way this was going anywhere. I wasn't looking for someone who couldn't take responsibility for their own life and instead blamed everyone else for their problems. Emma didn't just have issues with a few people. She seemed to have issues with everyone who didn't fit into her narrow view of the world. And I didn't want to be the next person on her list of fake people. I wrapped up the date as gracefully as I could, telling her that I had an early day ahead of me. She seemed fine with it, though she did text me a couple of times after that, asking if we could meet again. I never responded. I didn't need to be part of her constant cycle of blame. I wasn't her therapist, and I wasn't interested in listening to her complain about how awful everyone was to her. I didn't block her, but I quietly moved on, knowing I didn't need someone like Emma in my life. She had a lot of personal growth to do, but I wasn't going to be the one to help her with it. It was clear that she had a lot of baggage, and that kind of energy wasn't something I wanted to deal with in a relationship, especially when it felt like I was being set up to fail. I never thought I'd meet someone like Chad on Tinder. I was on the app mostly for something casual, and I wasn't looking for anything serious. But Chad's profile was different. His pictures were simple, yet intriguing. He wasn't trying too hard, no overly staged photos or weird filters. There was one of him hiking in the mountains, another at a barbecue with friends, and a third of him just sitting at a bar, looking relaxed. His bio said, "Let's skip the small talk and get to something real." I thought, okay, maybe this guy's different. Let's see where this goes. We matched right away, and the conversation was pretty laid back at first. He didn't hit me with some generic opener. Instead, he asked about the last book I read, and we started talking about that. It felt like an actual conversation, which is more than I can say for most Tinder chats. We exchanged messages for a few days, and he seemed genuine. No cheesy lines, no weird questions, just straight up talking about stuff we were both into. He suggested meeting up for drinks at a bar in town, and I agreed. I was excited, but also a little cautious, unsure what to expect. When I got to the bar, I was early. I grabbed a seat at a booth and ordered a drink, trying to shake off the pre-gig nerves. Then Chad walked in. He was exactly like his pictures. Tall, with a strong build, but not in an obnoxious way. He wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, casual but put together. When he saw me, he gave me a warm smile and came over. We shook hands, and I could already tell there was an ease to him that I liked. No awkwardness, no weird energy. We talked for a while, and I quickly realized that he was one of those people who made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He was easy to talk to, charismatic, and had this calm presence about him that just put me at ease. The conversation flowed well. He talked about his job, his love for traveling, and how he used to be really into playing soccer, but had to give it up because of an injury. I didn't mind listening. He was interesting without being overbearing. But then things started to get a little weird. At one point, he mentioned that he was very selective when it came to the people he let into his life. I wasn't sure if he meant friends or relationships, so I asked him to clarify. He went on about how he didn't like wasting his time with people who weren't on his level. I wasn't sure what that meant, so I asked him to explain further. That's when he said something that caught me off guard. "Look," he said, leaning in slightly, "I'm just not about wasting my time on people who don't have ambition. I mean, life's too short to hang out with losers, right? You need to be constantly working on yourself if you want to be successful." He said it so matter-of-factly that I didn't really know how to respond. It felt like he was trying to impress me, but I couldn't tell if it was working or if it just felt kind of arrogant. I wasn't a huge fan of the whole "I'm better than everyone" vibe, but I brushed it off. Maybe he was just confident. After all, I had matched with him for a reason, right? The conversation continued, and I tried to ignore the strange vibe I was getting. But then he dropped another comment that really made me pause. "You know," he said, "I've been on a few dates with women who just don't get it. Like, they'll talk about how they want to settle down, but then they've got no drive, no goals. It's kind of a turn off, to be honest." He looked at me, waiting for a reaction. I wasn't sure if he was trying to gauge where I stood or if he was just being blunt, but it felt uncomfortable. I didn't have anything against people who weren't constantly striving for success in the way he seemed to be. I definitely didn't think I should have to justify myself to him. I tried to keep things light, but he kept bringing up how he only wanted to be around people who were always hustling. I didn't want to argue or get into some deep conversation about personal goals and ambition, but I found myself zoning out. It was like he was telling me that if I didn't have some grand plan for my life, I wasn't worth his time. And the more he talked about it, the more I realized that he seemed less interested in me and more in my ability to keep up with his standards. At one point, he said something that sealed the deal for me. He mentioned how his last girlfriend had just didn't have the same fire in her, and that he had to let her go because she wasn't ambitious enough. He didn't say it in a way that made me think he was sad about it. It was like he was proud of the decision. It made me wonder how many people he had pushed away with that same attitude. I started to feel like this wasn't a date. It was more like an interview. I wasn't here to prove myself to someone, and I certainly wasn't going to sit through him listing all the qualities he thought I should have in order to be considered worthy. It was exhausting. I didn't want to hear about his exes or his idea of what makes someone worthy. I was looking for someone who could accept me as I am, not someone who thought I needed to be constantly proving my worth. So I did what I thought was best. I told him I had to go. He seemed surprised, like he hadn't seen it coming. I wasn't going to drag it out. I made an excuse about having an early day the next morning and stood up to leave. He walked me to the door, and I thanked him for the drink, even though I didn't really feel like I owed him any gratitude. As I walked away, I couldn't help but feel relieved. I wasn't sure if he was just arrogant or if that was truly who he was, but either way, I didn't want to deal with it. I didn't block him, but I never responded to his texts afterward. I knew I wasn't interested in someone who needed constant validation from the people around him. I wasn't a project or something to be fixed. I needed someone who saw me as a person, not as a checklist to be checked off. Chad was just too obsessed with his idea of success to see anything else. It started off pretty unassuming. I'd just re-downloaded Tinder after a pretty long break, partly because I was bored and partly because my friends wouldn't shut up about how everyone's meeting someone these days. I wasn't expecting much, honestly. Just some conversations, maybe a drink or two here and there. Nothing heavy. So when I matched with Lena, I didn't overthink it. She had that kind of look that made you pause, natural, chill, like she wasn't trying too hard. Her photos were mostly selfies in different apartments and coffee shops, and one where she was flipping off the camera in this goofy way that made me laugh. Her bio just said, "Let's skip the small talk." So I did. I messaged her something dumb about how cereal is basically just cold soup, and she ran with it. The conversation was fast, funny, a little weird, but in a good way. We didn't even talk about jobs or hobbies for the first few hours. It was just pure chaos, joking about pineapple on pizza, debating whether birds are real. I liked that she wasn't trying to sell herself or ask all the typical questions. It was easy. So when she asked if I wanted to meet up later that week for drinks, I said yes without hesitation. We decided on this bar downtown, sort of dive, with a few arcade machines in the back and a weird amount of neon signs. I got there a little early and texted her where I was sitting. She came in about 10 minutes later, wearing this oversized hoodie and leggings, hair tied up like she hadn't tried to impress anyone, but still looked good without effort. I appreciated that. She plopped down across from me and immediately made a joke about how she was hungover from the night before and might throw up on the table. It was so unexpected that I burst out laughing. That kind of set the tone for the night. Unfiltered, raw, a little chaotic. She was all over the place in conversation, but it was never boring. She told me she'd had a falling out with her ex-roommate because she wouldn't stop borrowing her clothes, and then veered into how she once faked an entire relationship to get free food at a restaurant. I thought she was joking. Turns out she wasn't. The more we talked, the more I started to see this pattern. Lena was unpredictable. She'd say something funny, then something weirdly intense, and then double back with another joke. It was like she was speeding through topics without checking if I was still following. She'd mention her job briefly, say she hated it, then laugh and say she doesn't actually believe in working long term. When I asked her what that meant, she just waved it off and said capitalism was a scam. At first, it was kind of funny, but then she kept going. She told me she had 3 different credit cards maxed out and had no plans to pay them off because what are they gonna do, arrest me? She laughed after saying it, but there was this edge to her voice, like she wasn't entirely joking. I laughed awkwardly and tried to pivot, but then she mentioned how she's been banned from Uber Eats. When I asked why, she said she kept reporting food as missing even when it wasn't, just to see how far the system could be pushed. I didn't really know what to say to that. I kind of just sat there with my drink, half listening while trying to figure out if she was testing me or being serious. But every time I thought she was exaggerating, she'd double down. She started talking about how people are too obsessed with rules and how she's been disrupting systems since high school. She once got a teacher fired, she said, because she was bored and didn't like the way he looked at her. She didn't seem remorseful. In fact, she seemed kind of proud of it. I should have left, honestly. But something about her was like watching a train go off the rails. You know you shouldn't stare, but you can't look away. I guess I was still hoping this was some exaggerated persona, like maybe she was just messing around or testing how far she could push a stranger on a first date. But the longer I sat there, the more I realized this was just how she was. The final straw was when we started talking about past relationships. I kept it light, just said my last one ended kind of mutual and wasn't too dramatic. She laughed and said, "Oh, I love drama. I miss the drama more than the guy." Then she launched into this story about how she once made her ex think she was pregnant just to see if he'd stick around. She said he freaked out and started crying, and then she ghosted him the next day. She told the story like it was hilarious. I didn't laugh. I think she noticed my face had changed, because she suddenly said, "Oh, don't be weird about it. He sucked. That was it. No reflection, no regret. Just the shrug like it didn't matter. I nodded, took a sip of my drink, and checked the time. I told her I had an early start the next day, which was a lie, and that I should probably head out. She said okay, totally unfazed, and stayed at the bar as I left. Walking home, I couldn't stop thinking about how casual she was about everything. The lies, the scamming, the manipulating people, it wasn't just that she had done those things. It was that she didn't seem to think any of it mattered. Like life was just a game she was playing for fun, and everyone else was either a pawn or a prop in her little show. I unmasked her that night. No message, no warning. Just gone. I was about to be her next story to tell with a smirk and zero accountability. It was late. I was half watching some documentary I didn't care about and swiping on Tinder just out of boredom when Ely's profile showed up. Normally I wouldn't have paused, but something about his face looked familiar. Not in the we've met before kind of way, more like I'd seen him in someone else's photos. His pictures weren't trying too hard. One of him on a rooftop at sunset, one with a dog, and one where he was playing guitar. I almost swiped left. But then his bio caught my eye. Recovering people pleaser, currently doing whatever I want. Something about that line made me laugh, so I swiped right. He messaged first. Said something dry and sarcastic about how the dating pool felt like the shallow end lately. We started talking. I liked how sharp he was. He wasn't overly flirty or trying to sell himself. The conversation felt like two people sitting next to each other on a long flight, swapping stories just to make time go faster. He was quick, funny in a kind of deadpan way, and he had opinions about everything, which somehow didn't come off as annoying. He asked to meet up that weekend and suggested this weirdly niche art cafe that did poetry nights and sold thrifted zines. I wasn't super into poetry, but I appreciated the weirdness of it, so I said yes. I showed up before him, grabbed a drink, and waited at a table in the corner. He came in wearing a denim jacket that looked like it had been through a war and these old beat-up boots. Not trendy, just very him. He sat down, looked around, and said, "This place smells like regret and patchouli." I laughed. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. He told me he used to want to be a philosophy professor, but dropped out because he got bored. Said he works freelance now, mostly writing ad copy, but he was thinking of switching to woodworking for the vibes. At first, I thought he was joking about half the stuff he said. Like when he mentioned living in a converted van for 6 months and showering at Planet Fitness. But the more he talked, the more I realized he wasn't making any of it up. He'd really done all these things. Lived with no plan. Quit jobs with no backup. Couch surfed across 3 cities. He told me he liked not having roots. Said it felt like a waste of time to tie yourself down when the system's gonna fail anyway. Again, I thought he was being edgy on purpose, but no. That was just how he saw the world. It didn't bother me at first. There was something kind of admirable about not caring what anyone thought. He wasn't afraid of chaos. If anything, he welcomed it. But as the night went on, I started to feel this weird pull between being impressed by his freedom and being slightly unsettled by how detached he seemed. Like, he talked about people like they were plot points. One story was about an ex who cheated on him, and he just shrugged and said, "She was probably bored, I get." Another story was about ghosting a guy who let him crash for 2 weeks. No real emotion, just facts. At some point, I asked him if he ever regretted cutting people off so easily, and he had have tilted his head and said, "Why would I? Regret's a scam. You either move or you get stuck." I didn't really know how to respond to that. He wasn't being defensive. It was like he genuinely didn't see the point in caring once someone was out of his life. We kept talking, and I started noticing other little things. He always referred to people in general terms. This girl I hooked up with, a dude I used to stay with, some friend from back then, no names, no details, like they were all interchangeable characters. And it wasn't just in stories. Even when I shared something personal, he'd nod like he was listening but respond with something completely detached. I told him about a falling out I'd had with a close friend, and he said, "Yeah, people outgrow each other. It's just biology." Like he didn't think emotional bonds were real, just chemical reactions we give too much meaning to. It was one of the strangest dates I've ever been on, not because anything went wrong, but because I couldn't tell if I was intrigued or disturbed. Ilya wasn't unkind. He paid for my drink, walked me to my car, and even messaged me afterwards saying he had a good time. but something about him stuck with me in a way that didn't sit right. It felt like he existed on the edge of normal human connection, watching from a distance, like he'd been burned before and decided the best way to deal with that was to detach completely. The next day, I reread some of our earlier messages and I started to see the pattern. He never really asked anything personal. He never said anything that revealed actual vulnerability. Everything was filtered through this layer of irony and distance. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was like he built his whole personality around not caring as a defense mechanism. I don't know what happened to him that made him like that, but I knew I wasn't interested in trying to peel those layers back. I didn't ghost him, but I didn't suggest meeting up again. He messaged a couple more times, always with the same tone. Detached, observational, kind of funny. I eventually just let the conversation fizzle out. He didn't follow up. He didn't ask why. Just stopped replying, as if he had sensed it coming and didn't mind at all. Like everything else, he moved on from it without flinching. Sometimes I think about Ely and wonder if he's still drifting around, living in someone's guest room, writing edgy copy for cereal brands and breaking hearts without even noticing. He didn't seem evil or manipulative. He just didn't seem like someone who saw other people as real. More like characters in a story he was writing in his head. I guess that's what bothered me most. Being around him made me feel temporary. So this one still messes with my head sometimes. Not in a dramatic way, just in a slow burn. What the hell even was that kind of way? I met Dylan during a weird phase in my life. I had just gotten out of a long relationship, wasn't really looking for anything serious, just trying to figure out what dating even looked like after being with someone for years. Tinder felt like the easiest, least emotional way to dip my toes back in. Casual, low pressure, no expectations. Dylan messaged me the same day we matched. He had this kind of chill vibe from the start, like he wasn't trying too hard. His profile had no red flags, just a few pics of him at music festivals, one with his dog, one where he was cooking something in a tiny apartment kitchen. His bio said low effort, high reward, and at the time I thought that was funny. Looking back, I should have taken it more seriously. Anyway, we started texting, and it was easy. He was the kind of guy who didn't say much, but made it feel like you were in on some inside joke just being part of the conversation. He asked if I wanted to come over and hang out, just drinks and music at his place. I know how that sounds, but I wasn't feeling super guarded then. I wanted something simple, and he wasn't creepy about it, just straightforward. So I said yeah. I got to his place around 8. It was a little studio apartment on the 3rd floor of this old building downtown. Not fancy, not gross, just kind of lived in. Records stacked on the floor, a random lava lamp, dishes in the sink, and posters on the wall that looked like they'd been taped up forever. He handed me a drink, played something lo-fi in the background, and we just chilled on the couch talking. It was mellow in a way that felt almost too easy. He didn't ask a ton of questions, didn't overshare either, just enough to keep things moving. At some point we ended up kissing, nothing crazy. I went home later that night thinking, okay, maybe this is a thing. We kept hanging out. Not dating, just existing in the same space sometimes. I'd come over a couple nights a week, bring food, watch stuff, mess around. It was never defined. We didn't talk about feelings or the future or anything heavier than what kind of pizza toppings we hated. I didn't mind at first. It felt kind of freeing to just be in the moment with someone, no pressure. But over time, I started to notice how Dylan seemed to glide through everything. Nothing seemed to touch him. Like, I'd mention something stressful at work, and he'd just kind of nod and say, that sucks, and move on. I told him once about my friend going through a breakup and how I was trying to be there for her, and he responded with, yeah, people get too attached. Gotta detach or you'll drown. It wasn't even that he was being mean. He just didn't seem to care about anything outside of whatever was happening in front of him. He never talked about his own life either. I realized after a while I didn't even know where he was from or what his family was like or if he had any real friends. He didn't bring people up. He didn't post anywhere, barely used his phone, and every time I asked him something slightly personal, he'd deflect or turn it into a joke. One night I was over and we were sitting on the floor eating noodles and I asked him if he ever thought about going back to school or switching careers or whatever. He looked at me and said, what for? It's all made up anyway. Then he laughed and changed the subject to a weird video he wanted to show me. That was the moment something clicked. Dylan wasn't just low-key. He was emotionally blank, like a screensaver of a person. Eventually, I started to feel weird about the whole thing. I'd show up, hang out, leave, and nothing changed. No progress, no intimacy, just a loop. And when I started pulling back, canceling plans, waiting longer to reply, he didn't react, not at all. He never asked what was up, never seemed surprised. It was like he'd already mentally filed me away the second we started. I wasn't a person to him, I was just part of the background noise. What finally pushed me over the edge was one night when I brought up something real. My friend had lost her dad, and I was just venting a bit, nothing heavy. He looked at me, totally neutral, and said, "Death's only hard for people who get too attached to things. Everything ends." He said it like it was obvious, like I was being silly for even feeling sad about it. And then he just stood up and started making popcorn like we hadn't even had a conversation. That was it for me. I left that night and didn't text him again. He didn't reach out either. No, what happened? No, where'd you go? Just radio silence. Like I'd never existed. And maybe in his mind I didn't. Maybe no one really does to him. I think about that sometimes, not just him, but how easy it is for someone to move through the world like that, collecting people like stickers and forgetting about them as soon as the next one comes along. Dylan wasn't dramatic or toxic in the way people usually mean. He didn't lie or yell or cheat, but he made me feel like I didn't matter at all. Like I could have disappeared halfway through one of our hangouts and he wouldn't have even noticed. And honestly, I don't know what's worse, being hurt by someone or being invisible to them. I guess everyone has their own way of protecting themselves. Some people put up walls. Dylan just never built the house in the first place.